Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. United States President Donald Trump has threatened Iran over reports it is planning an attack against the U.S. in retaliation for the killing of Qasem Soleimani. President Trump said U.S. response to any Iranian attack will be 1,000 times greater in the magnitude. Iranian Foreign Ministry has dismissed the report, saying this is part of Washington's disinformation campaign against Tehran. At least 2 dozens of migrants have drowned after their Europe-bound boat capsized in the Mediterranean Sea off the Libyan coast. A spokesperson for the UN Migration Agency said bodies of 2 migrants have been retrieved, while 22 missing people have been presumed dead. Talking to media, Safa Msehili said 45 people, mostly from Egypt and Morocco, have been rescued. Islamabad has strongly rejected the unwarranted references to Pakistan in a joint US-India statement. Foreign Office spokesman Zahid Hafiz Chaudhry said Islamabad's serious concerns regarding the joint statement have been conveyed to the US. Chaudhry said the international community is well aware that Pakistan is a country most affected by cross-border terrorism sponsored and supported by India. The Palestinians are observing a black day to protest the signing ceremony of the UAE and Bahrain's peace deals with Israel today. Palestine's Prime Minister Mohammed Shatayyeh has called it the darkest chapter in the history of the Arab world and a surrender of the Arab League. Shatayyeh urged the other Arab states not to take part in the celebrations. The number of COVID-19 cases in India has surpassed 4.9 million after a spike of nearly 84,000 new infections in the last 24 hours. More than 1,000 people died overnight in India, raising the death toll to over 80,000. In Pakistan, 6 more people have lost their lives to the virus, taking the death count to 6,389. Globally, the virus has infected more than 29 million people and claimed over 927,000 lives so far. News and details after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. United States President Donald Trump has threatened Iran over reports that it is planning an attack against the U.S. in retaliation for the killing of Qasem Soleimani. President Trump said the U.S. response to any Iranian attack will be 1,000 times greater in magnitude. He tweeted the statement after reports surfaced that the Iranian government was planning assassination of U.S. Ambassador to South Africa, Lana Marks. In an interview, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Washington will take the report very seriously. Meanwhile, Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Saeed Khatibzadeh has dismissed the claims as baseless. He said the blame is part of Trump administration's disinformation campaign against Iran. Earlier this year, Iran's elite Qud Commander General Qasem Soleimani was killed in a U.S. missile strike on Baghdad airport. The International Atomic Energy Agency has reached an agreement with Tehran over the implementation of safeguards in Iran's nuclear plant. The IAEA's Director General Rafael Grossi says the agreement will help develop cooperation and build mutual confidence between the UN body and Tehran. Director General Rafael Grossi said the IAEA had access to one of the 2 sites that was demanded by international inspectors. But Grossi said he has discussed access to the second site in his recent meeting with Iran's president. He said IAEA inspectors will visit Tehran's second nuclear site later this month. Iran and the IAEA released a joint statement last month to emphasize the facilitation of implementing the Comprehensive Safeguards Agreement. The Palestinians are observing a black day to protest the signing ceremony of the UAE and Bahrain's peace deals with Israel today. Palestine's Prime Minister Mohammed Shatayyeh has called it the darkest chapter in the history of the Arab world and surrender of the Arab League. Shatayyeh said the accord will be another day to add to the calendar of Palestine's misery. He urged the other Arab states not to take part in the celebrations. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the top diplomats from the UAE and Bahrain are set to sign the deal today in Washington, D.C. Now, an Israeli court has handed a Jewish settler 3 life sentences for murdering a Palestinian toddler and his parents in an arson attack in the occupied West Bank. The court said the culprit's actions were meticulously planned and stemmed from racism and his radical ideology against the Palestinian Muslims. It said the punishment was close to the maximum penalty prescribed by the law. The arson attack killed 18-month-old Ali Dawabsheh, his mother Riham and father Saad in 2015. A 4-year-old child survived with burns on his body. Moving on now, Islamabad has strongly rejected the unwarranted references to Pakistan in a joint US-India statement. Foreign Office spokesman Zahid Hafiz Chaudhry said Islamabad's serious concerns regarding the statement have been conveyed to the US. In a statement, Chaudhry said the international community is well aware that Pakistan is a country most affected by Indian-supported cross-border terrorism. He said the partner countries should refrain from endorsing positions that are one-sided and divorced from ground realities. Chaudhry said peace and stability in South Asia is threatened by the irresponsible policies and actions of the RSS-BJP regime in India. He said the international community must urge India to reverse its course and stop playing a role of a detrimental to regional peace and stability. Now, at least 2 dozens of migrants have drowned after their Europe-bound boat capsized in the Mediterranean Sea off the Libyan coast. A spokesperson for the UN Migration Agency said bodies of 2 migrants have been retrieved while 22 missing people have been presumed dead. Talking to media, Safa Mseli said 45 people, mostly from Egypt and Morocco, have been rescued. Mseli said this new tragedy signals yet again the need for increased search and rescue capacity in the Mediterranean. The shipwreck was the latest maritime disaster involving migrants seeking a better life in Europe. In August, a boat carrying dozens of migrants capsized, leaving at least 45 people dead. Meanwhile, 9 people have been killed in a car bomb blast in Syria's northern Aleppo province. Turkish state media says 43 others were wounded in the attack in the Afrin city. The area is under Turkish forces' control since 2018's anti-PKK operation. An explosive-laden small truck detonated, causing huge damages to the property in vicinity. Turkish media accused the PKK militants of carrying out the attack. However, the group has not claimed responsibility yet. Meanwhile, the UK's House of Commons has passed a law giving Prime Minister Boris Johnson's government the power to override parts of the Brexit deal. The lawmakers backed the internal market bill by 340 votes to 263. Ministers say the bill protects Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK if negotiations on a future trade deal break down. The legislation has garnered widespread criticism, and the opposition has blamed Johnson of having no regard for international law. However, the British Prime Minister said he ensures the UK could not be broken up by a foreign power. He accused the European Union of acting in an extreme way.
I regret to have to tell the House that in recent months the EU has suggested that it is willing to go to extreme and unreasonable lengths using the Northern Ireland Protocol in a way that goes well beyond common sense, simply to exert leverage against the UK in our negotiations for a free trade agreement.
Boris Johnson said the United Kingdom must reserve the right to override the Brexit deal to protect the country's economic and political integrity. Now, moving on, the number of COVID-19 cases in India has surpassed 4.9 million after a spike of nearly 84,000 new infections in the last 24 hours. Globally, the virus has infected more than 29 million people and claimed over 927,000 lives so far. More about the pandemic in this report.
The numbers of COVID-19 keep fluctuating in Asia, where some countries have contained the virus efficiently, while others continue to struggle. The Indian Health Ministry said more than 1,000 people died overnight, raising the death toll to over 80,000. South Korea says it will secure early supply of vaccines from international organizations for 60% of its population. Over in China, authorities have locked down the southwestern city of Ruli after 2 Myanmar nationals were diagnosed with the virus.
9月14日22时以后，无特殊情况不得进出瑞丽市城区10天，暂定1周。全市城区人员居家隔离。 对瑞丽城区全员开展核酸检测，费用由政府承担。
According to the World Health Organization, America remained the most affected, with over 4.8 million active cases and more than 511,000 deaths. The UN chief says only a unified effort can help defeat the pandemic.
I do believe that multilateralism will prevail and that nationalism, populism that is spreading will in the end fail. And by the way, if you look at COVID, it is clear that populist and nationalistic approaches have basically failed where they were attempted.
Meanwhile, the efforts for coronavirus vaccine continue, with a few in their final trials. UK researchers say they are set to begin trials of inhaled vaccines, as delivering doses directly to the lungs might give a better immune response. The United Arab Emirates has given emergency permission for the use of a vaccine in frontline workers. Stage 3 trials of the Chinese-made vaccine began in the UAE in July and are not yet complete.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 6 people have died from COVID-19 in the last 24 hours. The Health Ministry says the country's death toll has reached 6,389. The ministry said 404 people tested positive for the virus overnight. It said there are 5,774 active infections, while the total confirmed cases have crossed 302,000 mark. The ministry said over 290,000 people have recovered so far. Meanwhile, a phase-wise opening of education institutions has begun in Pakistan today. The National Command and Operations Center says a special monitoring mechanism has been devised to ensure implementations of the protocols. Now, China has decided to extend existing tariff exemptions for 16 products from the United States by an additional year. The Chinese Finance Ministry said the products include lubricants, whey and fish meal. Washington announced a broad import ban, including cotton and tomato products from the region. But it later left these products out and implemented narrower bans on products from 5 specific entities. Ties between the two countries have worsened this year over a range of issues, including the coronavirus, South China Sea, Hong Kong, telecom, and global trade. Now, China also says it firmly opposes what it called the U.S. coercive trade practices exercised on non-American enterprises. This comes after ByteDance rejected to sell TikTok's U.S. operations to Microsoft. China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin said certain U.S. politicians have been abusing power under the pretext of national security. Wang said their actions of suppressing and coercing non-American companies expose their agenda of robbery and economic bullying. He urged Washington to provide a non-discriminatory business environment for foreign companies operating in the country.
China firmly opposes that and will firmly support the pertinent companies in safeguarding their legitimate rights and interests and uphold international economic and trade rules. We urge the U.S. government to provide an open, fair, just, and non-discriminatory business environment for companies operating in the country.
More news coming up in this bulletin after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back now, moving on with the news stories. Venezuela has charged the alleged U.S. spy with terrorism and weapons trafficking. In a statement, Chief Prosecutor Tariq Saab said Matthew John Health was plotting attacks against Venezuela's oil industry and electricity system. Saab said the American citizen illegally entered Venezuela from Colombia. Without providing details, Saab said Heath was carrying a coin linking him to the Central Intelligence Agency. The prosecutor said authorities seized equipment including a grenade launcher, plastic explosive and a bag of US dollars.
The US citizen did not have a passport that showed a formal entry to the country. That is, he entered illegally. He just had a photocopy of the passport hidden in his shoe. The US citizen had a satellite phone that he refused to unlock. The US citizen was found with photographic images of the oil facilities.
The US authorities are yet to comment on the case. Now moving on to Peru, whose government has filed a lawsuit to block impeachment proceedings against President Martin Vizcarra. Justice Ministry Luis Huerta says the government wants the Constitutional Court to temporarily suspend the process. Huerta said the move is more of a precaution until the Constitutional Court rules on the matter. Meanwhile, in a televised message, Vizcarra renewed his vow to not resign.
I must tell Peruvians that what is happening here is the betrayal of someone close to me. It causes me sadness and beyond from the deception. I regret to say that this is a situation of a personal nature that has crossed over to the political sphere and has been leveraged by dark characters.
Well, last week, Peru's Congress began impeachment proceedings against Vizcarra for the second time in his tenure. Now, the Human Rights Watch has called for an end to interference in aid operations by parties to Yemen's conflict. In its latest report, the rights body said this obstruction is putting millions of people at risk who are dependent on assistance. The report said about 24 million of Yemen's 30 million people are in need of some form of assistance. It said since May, the Houthis have blocked 262 containers in Hudaydah port belonging to the World Health Organization. The body said blockage of a large shipment of personal protective equipment is hampering the efforts for the COVID-19 response. It accused the rebels of using shipments as bargaining chips. However, Houthi authorities told the Human Rights Watch allegations of aid interference are baseless. Donor concerns about aid obstruction and interference are part of the reason why funding is low. The report said donors in June pledged only $1.35 billion for humanitarian activities for the rest of 2020. A group of researchers has detected a potential sign of aerial life within Venus's atmosphere. The finding could be a major scientific breakthrough in the search for extraterrestrial life. Venus's harsh surface is inhospitable to life with temperatures exceeding 880 degrees Fahrenheit. But the group of international scientists said 2 telescopes in Hawaii and Chile found signs of phosphine in the Venusian clouds. The toxic gas is found on Earth only if it is manufactured or if it is produced by living organisms. Venus's clouds were thought to be able to tolerate microbial life so long as it could exist in the highly acidic environment. Now, global warming resulting from the abrupt climate change due to emissions continues to worry scientists. In yet another unnerving revelation, they say the vast and ancient ice sheet sitting atop Greenland shed 113 square kilometers chunk of ice within the last month. Details in this report.
The section of the Spalt Glacier at the northwest corner of the Arctic island had been cracking for several years. On the 27th of August, it finally broke free, clearing the way for inland ice loss to the sea. The Greenpeace ship has come to the very edge of the Arctic to document and protect that is hidden under the surface. Researchers say they want to make sure world leaders understand the urgency and the role of healthy oceans in tackling the climate crisis.
The new research is yet another important piece of evidence showing that it's really time we stop hitting the snooze button and wake up to the climate emergency. We need to curb climate emissions right now, immediately, and we need to create a network of ocean sanctuaries covering at least a third of the blue planet if we are to take climate crisis seriously.
The Arctic has warmed more than twice as fast as the rest of the world over the last 4 decades. Scientists say all 3 variables, sea ice, temperatures, and rainfall, are now being measured well beyond the range of past observations. That makes the future of the Arctic more of a mystery. From the deck of the ship, pilot Paul Ruziski muses over how quickly the region is changing since he began navigating between icebergs in 1996.
Well, not so long ago, I heard that we had 100 years before all the glaciers would be melting and the Arctic would be ice-free in the summer. Then I heard 75 years, 50 years, and recently I heard 15 years, 1-5. So it's accelerating. I'm not a scientist, but I listen to what the scientists say.
Sea ice coverage are now about 31%, lower than in the decade after 1979 when satellite observations began. This vanishing of sea ice also contributes to the region's warming. The icy white expanse is replaced by patches of dark water that absorbs solar radiation rather than reflecting it back out of the atmosphere.
Now, the Asian Development Bank says COVID-19 will cause economic output in developing Asia to shrink in 2020 for the first time in nearly 6 decades. The ADB's previous forecast in June had reckoned a 0.1% growth. The ADB said developing Asia group, which includes 45 countries in the Asia-Pacific region, is expected to contract 0.7% this year. In its recent Outlook report, the bank said the region is forecast to recover and grow 6.8%, still below pre-COVID-19 predictions. The updated forecast shows the damage brought by the pandemic was greater than previously thought.
Inequality seems to be increased because of by nature of COVID-19 pandemic and containment policy. Number 2, we very likely to observe a huge number of people falling below poverty line, especially according to our assessment, more than 160 million people in the region will pushing down in the poverty region.
Well, the ADB report has predicted that about 3/4 of the region's economies will slump this year. Now, China has become the only country in G20 to record gross domestic product growth in the second quarter of 2020. A report by Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development says China has returned an 11.5% growth in the quarter. The report said Beijing forecasts a 3.2% year-on-year rise in its GDP. It said an average drop of 11.8% was recorded in all other G20 economies compared with the first quarter except for China. India's GDP nosedived by 25.2%, while the US saw a 9.1% drop, with 8 countries posting double-digit drops. Meanwhile, European stocks are trading higher. Investors seem to have shifted their focus on the upcoming central bank meetings by the US, Japan and England. European stock 600 is trading more than 0.5% higher. London's FTSE 100 has gained close to 1%. Frankfurt's DAX has edged up slightly, while the CAC 40 in Paris has advanced close to 0.5%. Earlier, Asian markets traded mixed, with mainland Chinese stocks, Hong Kong's Hang Seng and South Korea's Kospi making gains, while Australia's ASX 200 and Japanese bourses declined. And now let's have a look at the weather updates across the globe. With the weather updates, we come to the end of this bulletin. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.